Irimajarti hirna da anal nifa carfoon conchina sturu in our ganivra, agus niarta gras da vranawarin can the horch concreta, on a scarwetcha has offered our nilivriher, agus our niliganiv fasta, agus gertria the creek no for the three creast our journey. Direct we beseech thee, Lord, our actions by thy holy inspirations, and carry them on by thy gracious assistance, that every word and work of ours may always be begun from thee and by thee, be happily entered through Christ our Lord. Amen. D. Vermudgeon. Now taking leaders' questions under Standing Order 36. Mary Lou McDonald.
Scan Corla, this week sees yet another disaster in government housing policy. As workers and families across Ireland continue to endure a worsening housing crisis, those fleeing a terrible war in Ukraine were left to sleep in Dublin Airport because there was no accommodation for them. Taoiseach, last March you said that the state would accommodate 200,000 Ukrainian refugees, but you had no real plan as to how you would meet that commitment. The Irish people have welcomed some 60,000 refugees from Ukraine, and the system is already overwhelmed. On Friday next, the latest homelessness figures are set to be published, and all indicators suggest that we will see another shameful increase in people in emergency accommodation. And meanwhile, an entire generation is locked out of affordable housing, locked out of opportunity, and they weigh up the prospect of life in Boston or Perth or Toronto. All the strands of this social catastrophe are linked by your government's failure to plan, your failure to organise, and ultimately by your failure to deliver. There is no doubt that government is top of the class when it comes to announcing big targets that grab the headlines. You get an A+ on that score, but time and again you fall short when it comes to delivery. This failure to plan and deliver means that we now see crisis heaped upon crisis. We see massive pressure heaped onto a housing system that is already broken beyond recognition, and this means that everyone loses. You lose if you've spent years desperately searching for an affordable home, and you also lose if you come here to this country fleeing a terrible war in search of shelter and help. So people are now frustrated. They ask how on earth it is that 9 months after Russia invaded Ukraine, government is now scrambling to put together a plan. How is it the government is appealing to the public for help, but at the same time people's offers to accommodate refugees are being ignored? It seems that your approach was to outsource the state's response, to cross your fingers and hope for the best. And what people see is the same incompetence and the same infuriating lack of pace this government has brought to addressing our domestic housing crisis. Now, not content with denying our own people the right to an affordable, secure roof over their heads, you now extend your catastrophic failure to those coming to Ireland seeking humanitarian assistance. The Harvard tap on Rialtas Tuarch Fui Blani, Tá an Gair céim titheachta imethe in Ulcas agus an Stát Fui Vrú, Lostín a Halóthar, Dó siúd atá ag éilú ón Coga. Curann an tepse Gair céim agus brú ulwar chorus atá brista. Taoiseach, people are sick of government's excuses for your failures in housing. You claim that housing is your #1 priority. Well, it's now time to back up those words with what matters: delivery. We all know there's a housing shortage, but what are you doing to ensure that offers of accommodation for those fleeing war come on stream quickly? The outsourced system is not fit for purpose. And when will we see a change in government housing policy to ensure that the locked out generation can finally afford to put an affordable and secure roof over their heads?
First of all, the Deputy for raising the issue this afternoon, and I think your commentary, Deputy, and some of the debate around this issue in recent days has become somewhat detached from the reality that we find ourselves confronted with. And I think the first thing, we need to be very clear about what this is all about, what has happened, where we are, and where we go from here. The first thing that has to be done is to acknowledge and pay tribute to the extraordinary Irish national effort in response to Putin's illegal and immoral invasion of his neighbour Ukraine. It's the first thing. We have all watched in horror as this man has ordered ruthless attacks on civilians by air, land and sea, displacing up to 7.2 million people all over Europe. And again, he's doing it with greater intensity now in terms of raining down drones upon the people of Ukraine and their energy infrastructure. But we've also responded to that terror with, I think, unprecedented warmth, generosity and support. More than 55,000 Ukrainians have sought and have received refuge in our country. It's one of the highest within the European Union, by the way, which you do not acknowledge. You call that a disaster, which is extraordinary language to be using, with approximately 43,000 of those being accommodated by the state in various ways. And in addition to that, we've accommodated 9,000 seeking international protection, which will rise to about 14,000 by the end of the year. Now, that's not a story of failure. That's not a story of failure. It's a story of families in every corner of this country, communities across this country, opening their homes and their hearts to people who are fleeing war. That is the story of Ireland's response to the war in Ukraine. And you should not try and have it both ways and try and play it for crude domestic politics from it. It's a story, basically, of a massive effort by our public servants across the board, across government and across the country. And it's a story about people understanding how much it means to help people fleeing war coming from another land. And I think we need to be careful of the implications of how this gets articulated. Because the only person that I see that would get solace from what you've said and the manner in which you have said it is Putin himself. Because that's what Putin wants to do. That's what Putin wants to do. He wants to create the impression across Europe that Europe can't cope with this, that Europe can't manage this. That's why the Iranian drones are being dropped all over Ukraine right now, destroying energy infrastructure, because he wants to make life unbearable and uninhabitable for Ukrainians. That's what he wants to do. And therefore, we have to make sure that he does not succeed within that particular agenda. And we have, right across the board, provided a range of accommodation options, not just one accommodation option. And we will continue to do so. And we will continue to work in solidarity with our European Union colleagues in terms of the directive to protect and to do everything we can to help Ukrainians who are fleeing war. And that's through a whole range of options in terms of procuring accommodation, in terms of building fresh accommodation, in terms of reconfiguring buildings and so on. And there will be challenges along the way. And there'll be ups and downs and bumps along the road of that, let there be no doubt, and just go through all of Europe. This is not an Irish phenomenon. Many other capital cities, many other countries are challenged by this unprecedented humanitarian crisis brought about by the war in Ukraine. It's unprecedented since World War II to have millions of people displaced and forced out of their homes by a war. That's the context here. And I don't accept your analysis of it at all. And in some respects as well, I note that you've intertwined this also with the housing crisis. The only incompetent thing I saw in the last number of weeks was a suggestion that we should do what the former UK government did in relation to energy.
Thank you, Taoiseach. We're over time. I shocked to Mary Lou McDonald.
Right. So there's no need to convince anyone either of the vile criminal actions of Vladimir Putin, or indeed to convince anyone of the incredible generosity and warmth that has been displayed by the Irish people. Those are objective matters of fact. The difficulty, Taoiseach, is that you have not matched the effort by the Irish people by action for government. That's the reality here. The facts are, as reported and acknowledged, it seems, by everyone bar you, The people arrived fleeing from Ukraine and there was nowhere for them to go. They slept in the airport. There was talk of some perhaps being left homeless and perhaps having to sleep on the streets. Now, I think we can all agree that that is not an acceptable situation. I have asked you to set out for us what the government response will be to do that. And look, people are well used to your government and the housing crisis that people have lived through for a decade and more. And now we have crisis upon crisis. What is your answer in respect of these individuals arriving? Why are you only cobbling together a plan now, Taoiseach?
But you've just acknowledged that up to 54,000 have been accommodated in this country, 43,000 by the state. That's not cobbling together a plan. That's a reality. That has happened. We never, ever before had to deal with such numbers coming into the country. We have to deal with it because of a war. It's a vicious war, and we have said, along with our European Union colleagues, that we will do everything we can to accommodate Ukrainians, and we have. And that needs to be acknowledged. You described all of that as a disaster. And then, you used the comment, we can't do our own as well, you said. And I know what that's targeted for. I know why that phrase was used. You used that phrase at the beginning of your remarks, and I know why you used it, and I know who it was targeted for. You're playing both sides on this debate, Deputy, and I regret that you are. I regret that you are. And you're not the first member, and you're not the first member of your party to play that game either. Now, what I'm saying is this. What I'm saying is this. We will continue to do everything we possibly can in relation to our housing crisis, and we are doing that. Right across the board in terms of affordable and so on. But in relation to the humanitarian crisis that has been imposed upon Europe by Putin's appallingly immoral and illegal war, we will do everything we can to respond, and we are responding and have responded as a country.
Thank you.
That's the language you used.
I'm moving on. Harchi and Loch Dibra.